Thanks everyone for attending. My name is Johnny Gordon. I'm the chair of the Community Reference Group for the River Activation Project. Tonight's session is our second public information webinar on the riverfront. So tonight we'll be discussing the natural water play park, and I'll hand over to Carolyn and Hamdorf and Sue Newell to do acknowledgement and to go through the information. Thank you.
So I'm just going to share my screen. And I'm assuming I'll just check in with Johnny with a thumbs up if you can see that screen, Johnny and Sue. Excellent. So just following on from Johnny, my name's Carolyn Hamdorf. I'm the Manager for Arts, Culture and Recreation. This evening, this information webinar, we're going to treat as an information session. It'll run for half an hour. We will be recording this information session. I will provide a bit of context for you, and Sue Newell will speak, who is the project manager for the Wimmera Riverfront Activation Project. She'll provide some specific details around the water play park, of which many of you have joined us tonight to hear a little bit more about. We will provide at the end of the information session about 10 minutes after 6 o'clock for anyone who may have a question that they would like answered. We'll use the forum or the chat line or the Q&A area in Zoom, and you can log your questions. We'll collate those and then provide a response through a Q&A sheet, which we'll actually upload to the Council's website along with the recording for this evening's webinar. So hopefully we'll be able to grab and capture any questions that fall out of the information session tonight. Hope that's clear for everybody. We'll continue on with, I just would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we meet, both past and present, and acknowledge any Aboriginal people who may be joining us tonight in this webinar. Thank you everybody for making some time tonight to spend half an hour listening to, I suppose, a little bit of an update on where we are in relation to the natural water play. Sue Newell and I have been involved in quite a lot of small group discussions and conversations over the last 2 months, and we've had some feedback through those consultations that there is, I suppose, a degree of confusion, or people would like to know more information about what the natural water play area is as part of the Riverfront Activation Project. So that's the purpose of tonight's meeting or discussion. I think I'll just move on to the next slide. So I'm just going to cover off on a little bit of background, assuming that some people were not at our first webinar, and just to give you a little bit of context. So the Riverfront Activation Project covers a very defined area, and this map is small, but I'll just talk you through it. Basically, the area that we are talking about is just west of the rowing clubroom. So the rowing clubroom, if you follow my cursor or mouse, you can see the rowing clubroom on the far west. The boundary is just on the west side of the rowing clubroom. It runs basically just around the Watonga Basin, and then on the south side of the caravan park. So the caravan park is all that area through here. It covers off on the southern end of Fibrae Street, the south end of the miniature rail. Along this point here, it includes the angling clubroom, but not the sound shell structure. So the line goes directly between that point. It goes along the kind of height, the rise or the track along the sound shell, cuts in behind Wilson Bolton, and then there's a little bit of a dog leg in here under the bridge and to the east of the bridge, just shy of the fence that has just been put up at the showgrounds, and then along the edge of the Wimmera River all the way back. So that just describes, I suppose, the area that we're talking about in relation to the Riverfront Activation Project. The area that we're going to be focusing on tonight and discussing tonight in more detail is the location for the water play park. And I'm going to show you on this map. So basically it's the area, if you know this area quite well, you'll know that there's a number of cabins face the river in the caravan park. The proposed site for the water play area is this area through here that I'm just circling around. So that section in here is what we're talking about in relation to the location for the water play park. I also just want to give you a very quick snapshot of where the community reference group and I suppose the progression of the project has evolved from. Many of you would have been involved in or contributed to the master planning process for the whole City to River project in 2019 and a little bit of 2018. Many submissions were made through that process, and basically we did some collation and consideration of those inputs and points of feedback, and there's close to about 550 references made to either the river or the riverfront. Those pieces of feedback, so honouring those pieces of feedback, they were collated, summarised, provided to the community reference group, and you can see it in, there's a map down the bottom, again small, but it will just give you the indication. All of the good, bad, neutral, negative, positive comments were summarised and basically located on a map and shared with the community reference group, and also provided to Tract Consulting, who are the landscape architects on this project. That information that was provided through the first phase consultation for the City to River project formed the basis of the initial concept plan for this riverfront area. So honouring what has been said beforehand, gathering that data, informing and distilling it and putting it into a concept idea was the basis from which the community reference group have provided feedback, and that we have had some ongoing consultation with stakeholders either located in, around or users of the space. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So the draft concept plan that it has been developed basically comes from that process. There's been a mention, Johnny mentioned that he is the chair of the community reference group. We have formed a community reference group for this project. They are a critical link between the work that council does, the work that Stu and I do, and the work that broader council does in relation to bridging this project and input and feedback from the community. Community reference group is a model that we would like to continue on using for further precinct development work. The conversations that we've had in relation to looking at the draft concept plan and getting really constructive feedback has been incredibly valuable. And the intent is really, the purpose of the community reference group is, I suppose, to sharpen and provide feedback on any of the planning that's been undertaken, but to also have a very keen eye on ensuring that engagement that we do through this precinct work is transparent and actually addresses the needs of the community, which is some of the feedback that we heard through the master planning process. So we want to do this work better. We actually want to reflect the interests and the needs of our community, and particularly the users and those located in these precincts, as effectively as we can. So considering function, use, future use, and consider those elements within the planning that goes forward. And the input that's been provided by the community reference group to date has been incredibly valuable, and I just would like to acknowledge their time and commitment to this project. And that's the list of the names of the representatives. Community reference group will be involved in the next phase of the engagement process as well. This is just a very quick summary of what has been done to date in relation to talking to community groups over the last several months and who has been consulted. We have carried out both face-to-face and some online consultations, referencing the draft concept plan that I mentioned before, which was distilled from the work done last year and that was informed by input provided around the riverfront or the river. You can see quite clearly there's been a number of conversations that have been held. In April and June, one of the lessons learnt from the master plan process, ways that we could be more effective in our engagement and consultation, was to really talk to those people who are most impacted first. So those stakeholders, the technical experts, the landholders, traditional owners, speak to those parties first and make sure that we understand what is doable, what's not doable. So we actually start sharpening from a long-term concept, a long-term master plan, which is a long-term vision plan, and we start to distill down to what is actually practical and applicable in this particular context. And a lot of that information, the technical and the user group inputs, have been very, very informative to shape up what could work and what couldn't work. In July, there's been a lot of discussions with very targeted groups, and I won't read them through all of these, but you can read through at your leisure when this goes up online. So I think there's going to be close to 20, 25 different consultations with different groups over the next, by the end of July, by the end of this week. We still have a few more people and groups to consult with in early August, but the intent is, once we've actually had all of these inputs fed into the draft concept plan, to come up with still a draft concept plan, but to take it out publicly and seek public feedback. And hopefully by the time we do that, which will be mid-August, a 2-week intensive consultation, either face-to-face down at the rowing club rooms or online. So there's a couple of options and a couple of ways that people can provide input. We're very interested in hearing from individuals who use the space, providing some specific feedback around what they think about the plan, the concept plan, and what they think about any suggestions and ways forward. So I'm going to just briefly touch on one other point before I hand over to Sue, who will talk more specifically about the natural water play area. So hopefully that's given you a bit of context around the broader planning across the precinct. Is that there's been some questions around the water play area and funding. So just to let you know, there has been an application made to Sport and Rec Victoria for $3 million to cover the cost of the water play park. We'll talk about what that actually looks like in a little more detail in a moment. And that application was considered in late May, early June. The community reference group were aware of this opportunity, and council have also supported the application at its June 20 meeting on June the 22nd. So an application has gone in. This was for stimulus funding for sport and rec related infrastructure. So it was very explicit about what we could apply for. And it will be a relatively quick turnaround. So generally grants to Sport and Rec Victoria take about 6 months to process. This will be relatively soon, and the intent is to promote post-COVID or COVID stimulus outcomes into the regions with sport and rec infrastructure. And the application made by council is to hopefully offset the cost of this part of the project. And one final point before I hand over to Sue is the imprimatur of the CRG is really to undertake very good engagement through this process, but also they've got a remit to do 2 things, which comes out of a council resolution at the end of last year, which is to identify a site for a cafe within this precinct, and also to look at the water play feature as one of those outcomes. So they are the 2 things that we need to consider as part of our design. Where and how they fit and locate within that precinct is what we've been seeking input from community around. And the consultations to date have been really, really useful. And I just would like to also thank the numerous people and organisations, groups and clubs that have actually come out and contributed and participated in that process. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Carolyn. Just to further touch base, I guess, on the grant application, with the Sport and Rec. You know, they're obviously very keen to ensure that anything that they do or invest in has maximum usage. And I'll just talk a little bit about what the Sport and Rec Victoria grant entails. So the idea for the natural water play area is that it's designed to incorporate water into natural play elements. So that you use hand pumps, creek beds, rocks, a little bit what's like depicted here in the pictures, to actually play in a natural way. So it's incorporating these pumps and gates, channels that the water flows through, so that children can actually control the water as the water goes through the cycle, if you like. The water usage, because it basically requires that you need to use hand pumps or some form of seesaw or any other way that you can get the water to flow. Because of that, there's not anticipated to be large volumes of water going through the site. And what is actually coming out at the other end, ideally council's looking into recycling that water back into our irrigation system. So we're very keen to make sure that any water that actually does get generated actually goes back into our system to be reused again. The natural water play is designed to be all accessible. That's actually a criteria of anything that we put up to Sport and Rec Victoria, so that there's accessible parking and accessible toilets, so that basically all users have equal ability to be able to use the space. And in doing this application and in working up what might actually look like the water play, we've had a lot of conversations with the Wimmera CMA, obviously about flooding and how that might work in a zone that's right next to the river. Also our traditional owners and the landowners, DELP, have been involved because there is actually a number of requirements and limitations around that particular space. And the Cultural Heritage Management Plan, which we're having completed at the moment, we've also obviously been in close contact about what we can and can't do in that space already. But that report will be done and delivered to council at the end of August to really give us an overview of exactly what's in that area. So the natural water play, as you can see, is very much designed around keeping with all of the feedback that we received from the master planning process, which is that we really want to preserve the natural part of the river. So hence the look and feel that you're seeing now. These are just a couple more images just to highlight what sort of natural play we're talking about. It gives the idea that you're actually you're in the dirt, if you like, and as well as that, our accessible toilets will actually have a spray in there. So should you wish to spray the children's legs off or wash their hands before they hop in the car, that will actually be included in our all accessible change rooms, change room as well, and toilet. Just looking at some of the material and elements, this slide is a little bit hard to see, so I apologise for that. But what we're trying to do here is show that the elements that are in the space are actually fitting with the area. So we're not having lots of colours and lots of bright, big mushrooms, if you like. This is very much around using wood, sand and water as a play area. Also incorporating some activities and some fun spray things as well, so that it actually gives that full water play experience. So the water play is not a splash park or a slide. It's nothing like that, and obviously that's not suited for that particular environment along the river. So we just thought we'd put this up there to say, look, it is definitely not any of these things. And what's been depicted in the natural play is very much around what we're doing.
So I thought I do any further comments in relation to the technical or the located elements of the water play area?
No, thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for that.
Thank you. So just to wrap up, and then I'll pass back to Johnny, is just to give you a bit of an idea of the next steps in relation to not just the water play component of the riverfront activation area, but what we've got proposed, and I've alluded to this in the introduction. So during July, April to July, we have undertaken quite a lot of direct feedback and input, and that information's been gathered, and majority key points have been shared with the landscape architects. So any informative or structural or functional issues that have arisen out of those consultations have been fed back to the landscape architects tracked consulting. The reason why we're not showing you maps tonight, specifically around the water play and or the actual draft concept plan, is that it's still iterating, but it's still being modified and adjusted. And the community reference group do have a meeting next Tuesday evening, the 4th of August, and that will be the point where we hope there will be quite a clear sign-off point in relation to that feedback being taken on, and actually and it reflects the plan, the draft plan reflects the feedback that's been gathered, and the feedback predominantly from you know, those entities that are located or adjacent to the precinct. So the CRG will actually be looking at signing off on the draft concept plan that then becomes public through the various consultations that will follow in August. So that just gives a bit of an explainer to why we're not looking explicitly at maps tonight. But we certainly do want to make sure that people understand the concept and the idea of what the splash park is and generally where it will be located. During August, we will provide a couple of options for people to provide feedback on the plans. We have booked the Angling Club Room from the 10th to the 22nd of August. And at the Angling Club Rooms, we will have a schedule of times which we'll start promoting after our meeting next Tuesday, which will basically be alternate morning, afternoons, and some weekend times. Community reference group members will be on site as well as council staff for you to come down and view the agreed draft concept plan. And we'll be seeking some input and feedback from anyone who's interested in contributing. These drop-in points are, will obviously be undertaken in a COVID-safe way, and will be dependent on whether the situation within regional Victoria stays the same. So mandatory mask wearing will be now part of the condition, but we will certainly be keeping a watch on whether we can still maintain those drop-in sessions. We'll also be providing an online option for people to view the maps and also provide feedback through the process, which will be distributed back to the community reference group. There'll be some further refinement done on the draft concept plan and work towards a concept plan that has had the appropriate levels of feedback and input, not just from the community, but also from those technical landholder and landowner inputs, the CMA and other parties. So all of those inputs will actually feed into what we hope to have as a concept plan to go forward. And a concept plan provides more detail around how the site can function. There'll be elements that we look to advance. There is a budget overall for the whole site of about $10 million. If we get the $3 million allocated from Sport and Rec Victoria, we have about $2.5 million for further works across the whole site. And that will be a bit of a consideration for the community reference group to decide on what elements we do first. But maybe we invest in the civil works, And we're also looking at feedback from the community during August, also on what aspects and elements we proceed to further detailed schematic work, so that we're in a really strong position if funding does come forward and through to take advantage of that funding and to be aligned to a plan that is reflective of community interest and need, and also takes advantage of any funding that does come forward. So basically the public consultation or public drop-in sessions or online sessions will happen from the 10th to the 22nd of August. Throughout August as well, I mean, some people prefer, and we've certainly had a number of people make contact directly with council staff, or directly to CRG members. So you can speak directly if you know a community reference group member, or if you'd like to speak to either Sue or myself at council or other council staff involved in the project. You can certainly do that. We invite people, if you've got explicit questions that you would like answers on, or you're interested in knowing a little bit more about particular elements, we certainly invite that. In September, as I said earlier, the concept plan will be developed further with the inputs that have been gathered by the August public consultation, and hopefully further refined. Hopefully we've ironed a lot of the bugs out in the consultations that have been done to date, and that we'll seek to get some feedback from the CRG particularly and the community on what areas we prioritise across the precinct with the resources and the funding that we have to date. Then the plans will ideally go out up to council at the end of September. Council goes into caretaker mode towards the end of September, and we're very keen to ensure that this council has an opportunity to see the outcomes of this work. So that basically is a summary of, I suppose, an overview of the riverfront activation project, but explicitly focusing on the waterfront, the water play area, natural water play area. As we've mentioned, I'll pass back to Johnny, and we will be leaving the webinar open for about 10 or 15 minutes after we've finished the information session, for people to put forward any questions that you might have or that have been elicited from the information session this evening. Johnny, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Carolyn and Sue. I hope people that have attended tonight got something out of it, and understanding the difference between a natural water play and a splash park, which is something you would see down in Geelong or those bigger sort of areas. And it certainly has been hot topic among a lot of people in the community. So just hopefully laid some of the fears of thinking it's going to be something big and plasticky and not all natural, which is what really come through with the feedback from the City River Master Plan. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Again, remember the dates from the 10th of August to the 22nd of August down the Angling Club rooms to, if you want to have, your feedback and be heard, make sure you lock those dates away and keep an eye out in the media and stuff like that to make sure you can attend and have your feedback. And also any questions that you have for tonight, make sure you get them in on the chat line, and hopefully the guys can answer all your questions that you have. So thank you.